I am glad to be back. And I've been drinking coffee since like super early this morning. And I haven't had to do anything yet until just now. So I've been drinking coffee during the whole service. Kind of like you guys did a little Facebook and Candy Crush, like how you all do it. I'm kidding, right? You're not Candy Crushing, I'm sure. Hey, but there is a deal here. If you are on your phone and you are addicted to Facebook and you do not know what to do with it while you're here during service, while I'm up here speaking, hey, we've got a thing we do on Facebook Live. So if you follow our page, our messages go out, and we're going to work on getting that better and getting so our whole service gets to be streamed. And we know that there are people who can't be with us. Some of our communion shut-ins, I know that they watch, and so they participate with us. But you know what would be really cool is if we had some people who are pastoring to those who watch in real time. And so if you're on Facebook or you have your phone and you want to get in there, I don't know if anybody's watching right now or not, but we're going to set that expectation that there are going to be people who are going to watch. And because of that, we want to connect with them. If you can do two things. One, not be weird, right? We know that, I know the temptation's there. You get on Facebook and you think nobody can see me and I'll just be weird and it'll be cool. Do that on your own page. Don't do that on our page. So if you want to get on there, we'd love you to be on there. Don't be weird. Number two, don't get in a theological debate with somebody. All right? So I get it. Your preacher's going to say something very, very strange. The person's going to be watching. They're going to type something in, and because there's somebody communicating back with them and you're going to think you have to defend me or Jesus or our church, you don't need to do that. God is big enough, strong enough, cool enough, and I'm convinced worthy of taking care of his own battles. So just be nice. Do that. And if you get engaged with somebody, offer to take up a prayer request, write it down on a card and promise them that we will pray about it. Right? Or get to know somebody. So, hey, it is totally cool. And if you are somebody who's sitting next to somebody on Facebook, just give them the benefit of a doubt that they are pastoring somebody else inside of our Facebook page and leave it alone, right? Let it go out of your head. Don't wait the next half hour while I'm preaching and all you can think about is not Jesus, but that person in front of you is on Facebook and you can't believe it. Right? So let's just do that. I think it'll be a really, really cool opportunity for us to see some people connected to Jesus that maybe wouldn't be. And that's what we're about here at Whole Christian Church. Our mission is to connect people with Jesus. It's simply put, the mission of Whole Christian Church is connecting people with Jesus. And there's a reason why that's our mission. Because we have this lofty vision set out in front of us. To become a living, loving community. Having an impact on our neighbors and making disciples into the thousands. And man, there's a lot of steps that have to go into it. And we have to be intentional about some of the things that we do. And some of the choices that we make. And I'm beginning to recognize that in my own life. I don't know if you ever recognize that or not. But if I want to get to the places that I want to go to, I have to be intentional in the steps that I take. There are some parts in my life where good enough just is not going to cut it. Right? Have you ever noticed that there's some places where you don't want just good enough? Right? Just think, wives, if your husband said, hey, you know what? I've tried being great. From now on, for the rest of our lives together, I'm just going to be good enough. Think if you went to your doctor and you asked him, are you sure that you know how to do this surgery? And he says, well, I'm not excellent at it, but I'm good enough. Or your mechanic who said, hey, I don't really know if your brakes are in prime condition or not, but go ahead, drive all winter long. They're good enough. I told my wife one time that her heater in her van was good enough. She complained to me about it over and over and over again. Told me how terrible it was that she couldn't even see out the windows. And I kept saying, it's good enough. I ride a motorcycle. There ain't no heater on mine. I don't have any problem. I recognized that good enough wasn't really that great. In fact, it wasn't even acceptable. But one day I jumped in her van and decided that I was going to drive it to work. I'm just going to let you know that it was not here at Whole Christian Church. We were still in Indiana, but I called in sick that day. Right? Called myself and said, I'm not doing anything at church today. I drove myself to the junkyard, got underneath another van, pulled out a blower motor, put a new blower motor inside of that, and told my wife, happy birthday, I fixed your van for you. I'm a loving husband. Truth of the matter is, I recognize that good enough sometimes just isn't good enough. There's some other places where good enough just isn't going to cut it. Right? Maybe this family in this next picture thought, hey, we need to add some security to our house, so we'll put up a fence with a gate, and we'll lock it. I wonder if they thought good enough would cut it. we have those pictures there? Right? I don't know about you, but I think I did break through that. Good enough, right? Maybe you have a house that needs some stairs to get into your door, and you think, I'm not going to really do a great job. I'll just do good enough, right? Yeah, there's stairs. That's good enough, right? Maybe, right? Just maybe you have a new house and you think there's a little obstacle here, and we need to get the driveway put in so I can drive into the garage. Good enough, right? Maybe you decided to take your kids to the park, and you thought, man, I know that my town really loves kids, and they're going to have this great slide for them to go down. And you show up there, and this is what it is. Oh, no. I don't know if you noticed or not. I don't know if somebody intentionally put that there, but, man, sometimes good enough just does not cut it. I wonder sometimes, as I say, there's this lofty goal, this ideal that I have of connecting people with Jesus. If I'm just going through life and just making good enough attempts. Here's the truth, that if my stairs were offset from my door a little bit, and it was my door, I might not have a choice. And so I'll jump from steps to door. I'll learn how to drive my car forwards, backwards, over 2 slats, and make it feel like it was a complete driveway. But I wonder sometimes if good enough is too much of an obstacle for somebody else to actually see Jesus. If God's saying to me, Conrad, I want you to be the person that shows him. Am I stairs that are offset? Am I a driveway that's never going to really get past? Am I a gate that's not doing anything? Am I a slide that's just allowing people to go down any hole? And what I'm beginning to realize is that God doesn't operate in good enoughs. In fact, I see that in the temple that we read about in the Old Testament. In fact, here's Solomon's temple. I got a little video. We'll just take a little tour around it for a minute. don't know if you noticed it or not, but everything was done with excellence. It was like they couldn't fathom. I'm sure the guys who were working on it, ladies, if there was ladies working on it, couldn't fathom just saying, I know that this isn't completely covered with gold, but it's good enough. We started off this sermon series at the beginning of the year, and we said we're going to make some choices. Because we don't want to just be good enough. We want God to do some amazing things. And in fact, I'd love to see God fulfill that promise that He can do more than we could ever ask for or imagine. But I think in order for us to actually see those things happening to us, with us, in us, around us, there's some choices that we have to make. Right? The first choice that we said was that we have to choose to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind. We said that we have to choose to love people. Right? To begin to take on the eyes of God and His heart and see that there are lost, broken, fallen people that we need to love. Here's what else I'm beginning to understand. Is that I may not be perfect, but I can choose to pursue excellence. And here's why. Is because I believe that excellence makes us a little bit more comfortable. You ever walked into a restaurant that you can tell that they kind of mop the floor somewhere, sometime? Okay, they might have a mop. But you walk in and you can tell that their choosing of the surface of the floor was intentional, that it'd be easy to clean up. But the first step you take is fine, but as you begin to pick your foot up, you just hear that squishy sound like suction. And you're like a suction cup. And you are convinced that you didn't buy suction cup shoes, but you would walk just a little bit further to find out for sure. You take a couple more steps. And I shared that with our leadership meeting this morning, and I think it was Mark said, it would happen one time. The second step would be me walking out the door. Right? Because good enough, listen, good enough makes us uncomfortable. You don't want the carnival worker to say, oh, I'm so glad you brought your kids here. We made sure that each and every bolt was tightened good enough. Oh, excellence begins to breed some comfortableness. Right? And whether or not you like Disney or not, I am more convinced, I am more comfortable stepping onto a ride at a place like Disney World than I am at the carnival that happens to pop up every once in a while. Why? Because it's done with excellence. And so my life, maybe I'm hitting hiccups in life or in bringing people to Christ or us as a church because we just settle for good enough. But I'm beginning to see that God doesn't want us to settle for good enough. In fact, Solomon's temple was the epitome of excellence. Let me back up just a little bit. Because those building blocks that were used to build the temple are also the same building blocks that we can use to pursue excellence as followers of Jesus. Especially when we are reminded that Paul writes these words in 1 Corinthians. He says, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Here's what Paul's saying. He said, you are a temple of the Holy Spirit. And if that tabernacle was built with a pursuit of that kind of excellence, what are we pursuing? Both individually and corporately. I think that applies to both. That our bodies are precious gifts from God, but so is this body as a body of believers. We are a precious gift of God. And in both instances, I think we can say that we are this tabernacle, this temple, this building for God to exist, to live, to be breathed through. The question is, what are we building? What are we building personally in our lives? Whether it's in our marriages or in our jobs or at school or in our neighborhoods. What are we building as a church? Because I'm convinced that if we want to see something excellent built, we need to use the right blocks. And I think that there's some blocks that we can get, that we can begin to put in, that will hopefully lead us down a path where we get to see something excellent built that God can use in ways that are beyond anything we could ever ask for or imagine. And the first thing is presence. Not presents like what we got for Christmas under a tree, but presents, as in the presence of God. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but Solomon's temple, the tabernacle, the blueprints that God had given to his people was that everything would lead them to the presence of God. Everything. Their whole walk in from the outer courts into the holy place, into the Holy of Holies, was a direct going to the presence of God. The wash basins to clean themselves up, the place to offer sacrifices so that they could be atoned for, the lighting of the candles so that they could see that God, the light of the world, the incense that was going up as prayers, it was all directed towards the presence of God. Like the 127th Psalm starts this way. It says, unless the Lord builds a house, those who build it labor in vain. We need the presence of God. It continues, unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. And God's presence in the days of the Old Covenant was represented by the Ark of the Covenant. That miraculous thing that was in the middle of the Holy of Holies. And listen, the Israelites, they carried that Ark with them for 40 years in the desert. 40 years wandering around with no home, with no place. They carried that around. And after the conquest of Canaan, that place that they were going to be calling their own, it was taken to Shiloh. Until King David took the Ark to Jerusalem, where his son and his successor Solomon eventually installed it in the temple. Listen, I don't think that it was just as soon as Solomon became king that they thought, hey, let's make an excellent place for this thing. They were pursuing excellence in building blocks so that when they finally got to that place where God was going to remain, at least in their concept, that it was going to be nothing short of excellent. Back in 1 Chronicles chapter 15, we read these words. It says that David assembled all Israel at Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the Lord to its place, which he had prepared for it. You see, he wasn't going to have a good enough crowd. He was going to have an excellent crowd. And he brought the whole nation together. Because he knew they needed God in their life. But they couldn't take their next steps without having him. And if I want to have an excellent life, if I want to pursue excellence in my life, if I want to see us pursue excellence, I know it should be something that should not be said. But the first thing I need to do is make sure that I'm seeking the presence of God. Did I just have him as my co-pilot? I hate that bumper sticker. Anybody else? You ever see that bumper sticker? My co-pilot is God? I wonder. How many times, if he's your co-pilot, are you paying attention to him when he tells you to turn? You know what I'd much rather do? Let God drive the car. Because even though I might be pursuing excellence, I know I'm not perfect. But if I can have his presence with me, maybe it begins to impact the way that I work, the way that I live, the way that I breathe, the words that I say, the reaction that I have to somebody else. Let me ask you again, are you desperate for the presence of the Lord in your life? Maybe a better way to begin to find that out is ask yourself, is your life just trudging along good enough? Or is it excellent? So how do we do that? We read. Look, we live in a world today where you don't have to actually open the book up and read it. You can just pop it into your hit media on your car button and have your phone read it to you. You can just listen to it. Pray. King David was devoted to prayer. And let me tell you, David was not perfect. And we don't have to get into all his shortcomings and the times that he failed. But they were there. But one thing he never strayed from was his devotion to prayer. In fact, in 1 Chronicles 17, it says that King David went in and sat before the Lord and said, "Who am I, O Lord God? And what is my house that you have brought me thus far?" You know, in that verse, I love that phrase, sat before the Lord. When's the last time you sat before the Lord? You look and say, my life's good enough, but is it excellent? You see, I don't want my next step to go from an okay life to a good enough life. I want us to continue moving to where we can begin to see this excellent life, this pursuit of excellence. But maybe good enough is being too busy. Maybe good enough is taking on too many tasks. Maybe what it is time for us to do is to quit, maybe talking, or worrying, or working, or moving, and just sit before the Lord. You see, if you don't have that in your life right now, these next steps may not matter very much. The next blocks aren't going to do you any good. You may have a garage door, you may have a house, but you might not have an adequate driveway to get up into it. So it's not going to do you any good. It'll be good enough. Maybe another way is to gather around other Christians. Get around them as often as you can. You see, here's the truth, is that whole Christian church can't make you do it. We cannot design enough programs for you to get there. And in fact, that's not the role of the church. But each and every one of us has I used to have a phone. Who's that number you call? Who's that person you text? Who's that person you're sending a direct message to on Instagram or snapping real quick? Use them and bounce off to see, to recognize, see what your conversation sounds like, and then ask yourself, am I spending time with God? Get around other questions. The second building block, after we make sure that God's right there with us, is praise. Man, I love this because I think too often people think that we are just given this list of commands and do's and don'ts. But here's what God says, is, I want to be around you and I want to celebrate with you. I love the illustration of my relationship with Jesus and marriage. Because I can still remember getting married. Can you? And I remember what I was looking forward to. Now, I'm a dude, and so I'll let you use your imagination of what I was really looking forward to. But the second thing I was looking forward to was the celebration. Right? I wasn't looking forward to walking down the aisle. I wasn't looking forward to getting all dressed up. Right? I was looking forward to the celebration. I wanted to make sure that everything was there for a celebration. Now, remember, I was not a follower of Jesus when I got married, so that celebration meant we are going to party. We're going to dance. I'm going to hold my new wife in my hand, and then I'm going to take her home with me. And I'm going to celebrate with everything that I have. When's the last time that you just said, hey, you know what? I have a God who says he will never leave me or forsake me. And your relationship with him was so powerful that you said, I'm just going to celebrate. How many of us driving down the street would be complained about because our music is so loud and what we're doing is worshiping God? Right? I get it. I know. There's some of those kids who have their bass so darn loud that it shatters your windows and it drives you nuts. They're celebrating something in their life. They're praising something. And you know what? It wasn't just put there by the devil. I think that's something that God placed inside of us. And if I can begin to find that connection with God, maybe it's my music that begins to be too loud. Maybe it's my worship, my celebrating. Maybe I become a little bit more like David. The second building block of praise. David, who, by the way, wrote the 73 of the Psalms, he was devoted to praising God. He loved it. In 1 Chronicles 15, it says, David and the elders of Israel and the commanders of thousands went to bring up the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with rejoicing. And because God helped the Levites who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, they sacrificed 7 bulls and 7 rams. David was clothed with a robe of fine linen. I want you to pay attention here. David was clothed with a robe of fine linen, because that's what you do when you celebrate. You get dressed up. As also were the Levites who were carrying the ark, and the singers, the Chenah, and the leader of the music of the singers. And David wore a linen ephod. So all Israel brought up the ark of the covenant of the Lord with shouting to the sound of horns and trumpets and cymbals, and made, listen, loud music on harps and lyres. I don't know what a lyre is, and I don't know how loud you really can get a harp. But evidently they had some different types of harps than I had. Or they have a different idea of loud. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But I think what we begin to see is that Israel understood something. That when God is with them, it is time to celebrate. Are we celebrating? Are we praising? You know, there's an interesting thing that happened. Because Michal, David's wife, she didn't join in on the praise. As we keep reading from chapter 15 of 1 Chronicles, this is what it says in verse 29. It says this, and as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David dancing and celebrating. And she despised him in her heart. I don't know if I've ever really thought about it this way, but over these last couple of weeks, it's been hitting me pretty hard. Because I've always looked at this verse and thought, man, how terrible for Michal. How dare her? But I wonder, how many times have I looked at somebody else celebrating Jesus and then looked down on the way that they were doing it? Told them how they were getting it all wrong. They should be dancing with different clothes on, or clothes on at all. Which, by the way, please come in here with clothes on. Right? But request, right? Just a request. Man, let's be a people that are known because we praise. Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David dancing and celebrating. She despised him in her heart. I don't think she just despised David. Here's what began to happen. She misses the party and she misses God. And all of a sudden, I believe what happens is we begin missing God working. We're too busy watching what everybody else is going to do or what everybody else would say or how embarrassing that would be. So wives, maybe here's the lesson. Don't just watch your husband dance. Go out there and dance with him. Husbands, don't just watch your wives dance. Go out there and dance with them. Grandparents, don't just watch your grandkids out there dancing. Go out there and dance with them. And if they call the cops for the music being too loud, at least you have money to bail your yourselves out. Let's begin to be known as a people who celebrate, who praise the presence of God in our life. I am convinced that if we can do that, we will begin marching towards an excellence, that we won't settle for good enough. When the ark, even when it was temporarily placed in Jerusalem, David broke out in praise in front of the people. Here's just one line of his praise. He says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the peoples, sing to him, sing praises to him, tell of all of his wondrous works." And I don't think it's an accident that when the church was established, right, when we begin to flip the page in the testaments in our Bibles, the Christians were called to praise God the first day of the week. Let's praise him. So if I want to be excellent, I've got to seek his presence. I've got to praise him, but I also have to understand the promise. The promises are hard for us, aren't they? We live in we get pretty cynical because we live in a broken world where people make promises all the time, right? Remember in Michigan last year when we were voting and we weren't going to have potholes anymore? It gets hard to believe people, doesn't it? As God was working in and through David and the people of Israel, God was making promises to them. And David made promises to God. Here's the promise that God made to David. He says, "When your days are fulfilled to walk with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever." As God's speaking to David, I've always wondered what David felt like, right, when God said, "Hey, you're not going to get to build my house, but your son will." And I think he could have taken that a lot of different ways, right? One way he could have been mad. "My son Solomon, don't you know he has a thing for women that nobody can control?" And here's the promise that David made to God. He didn't get mad. He says, "And now, O Lord, let the word that you have spoken concerning your servant and concerning his house be established forever. And do as you have spoken, and your name will be established and magnified forever, saying, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, is Israel's God, and the house of your servant David will be established before you." Here's what David said. "I might not get to do all the things that I want to do. I might not get all the credit and all the glory for the things that I want to see done. But here's what I will do. Lord, I will give you my life." Which means that I will not make preparations for a thing that my son is going to build in a just good enough way. I will seek it out with excellence. I will make preparations. I will get our people ready. I will get him ready. I will make sure that it's all done with excellence. Lord, I will give you my life. Maybe that's a promise that you need to make to God right now. He might be saying, I've got something for you. It might not be everything that you want, but it will be everything that you need. It might be that you're only a building block for the next person, but please do not settle for walking this life good enough, because the next person will have to make up the difference. Imagine if we left this place in a way that was set up for the next generation to move even further. To set up that block in an excellent way. Not good enough to where they'd have to tear the whole thing down and start all over. But excellent so that they could just continue moving. I'd like to think that we would set up a trampoline. And set it up so that, right, it's not going to fall down when somebody jumps on it. That it's going to be flexible so that it will actually get a lot of height. That it won't just be good enough, which means it's not that exercise trampoline that some of you had in the 80s. But I'm talking about the one that they put out at when they want to really show you how high they can jump. And if our life right now is just setting up that trampoline so that the next generation can jump high, then we better set it up in an excellent manner. Not good enough. Good enough, they will fall. Good enough, they won't get any air. Good enough, they will be embarrassed to call it theirs. Let's build it excellent. So let's say, Lord, I'll give you my life. Everything that I have, I will put into it. Lord, I will love you. Lord, I will love people. Give you everything. There's a promise that God has made to you. That promise is that He will never leave you or forsake you. That promise is that Jesus is going to prepare a place for you. That promise is that He has brought good news. That good news is that the kingdom of God is at hand. The kingdom of God is at hand means that you get to enter into it today. We could enjoy a better life if we simply pursue excellence with Him. Fourth building block is preparation, because I'm quickly running out of time. David didn't just say, well, we'll wait for my son. He began to prepare. You know what I really love is that before David prepared to build the temple, he prepared an altar. Prepared an altar. In 1 Chronicles 21, verse 18, verses 22, 24, 26, we're going to skip around a little bit just for the sake of time. Yeah, you can go back. I encourage you to go back and read it later. It says, now the angel of the Lord had commanded God to say to David that David should go up and raise an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Skipping down to verse 22, it says, and David said to Ornan, give me the side of the threshing floor that I may build on it an altar to the Lord. Give it to me at its full price, that the plague may be averted from the people. Then Ornan said to David, take it, let my lord the king do what seems good to him. There's that word, good. See, I give the oxen for the burnt offerings and the threshing sledges for the wood and the wheat for the grain offering. I give it all. But King David said to Ornan, no, but I will buy them for full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, nor offer burnt offerings that cost me nothing. Here's what David says. I won't make an offering that's just good enough. And if my life, right, as we read in Romans 12, to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice, let me just give you a little heads up into that verse that doesn't talk about the way that we sing on Sunday morning. If I was to offer myself as a living sacrifice, I better be willing to pay full price for it. Not let somebody else pay for it. Because good enough is not good enough. Verse 26 says, David built there an altar to the Lord and presented burnt offerings and peace offerings and called on the Lord. And the Lord answered him with fire from heaven upon the altar of burnt offering. I love it. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, nor offer burnt offerings that cost me nothing. Let me just ask you a question. How invested are you in this vision that we believe that God has given the whole Christian church? Do I want to just come here and offer offerings to it that cost me nothing? How invested am I in my life, in my marriage, and as being a father and a friend, an employee? How invested am I in my neighborhood? When I look at it and say, oh, look how terrible it's becoming. How invested am I becoming in it? Am I willing to pay? Am I willing to give? Am I willing to go? Or am I just going to offer offerings that cost me nothing? I love being married, but I don't want it to cost me anything. I love having a car, but I really don't want to pay for it. You ever notice that you care more about the things that you're invested in? And the things that you're invested in, you like to have excellent, not just good enough? Right? Let's just crack the seal. I've already hit that line, so let's just go further. Some of us aren't invested at all. We don't tithe, and let alone give anything to the work being done here. We show up and say, well, somebody else has put it here, somebody else will do it, somebody else will make it done. And then we wonder, why aren't we seeing great things? Well, maybe the first step, I'm not going to ask you to pull out your wallets again and put them into the plate. If you all of a sudden felt led to do that, Givelify, you can download the app on your phone, and we will take it. But maybe the first thing that we need to do right now is building an altar. I don't know what that looks like in your life. But there may be an altar that you need to put down. Your pride, your selfishness, your stubbornness. Maybe there's an altar that you need to put down your guilt. I get it. You need to put down the baggage that you've been carrying around. And it might even be baggage that you're carrying around because somebody else put it there. Maybe you have to put down your worry. Maybe the first thing you need to do isn't necessarily grab your wallet. Maybe it's to grab your heart. Because I think there's a powerful lesson here. That the fire of God didn't fall until David built an altar. And then the Lord answered him with fire from heaven upon the altar of burnt offering. Let me just be honest with you for a moment. Hopefully you understand I've been honest with you the whole time. Maybe a little bit transparent. I think there's times in my life where I was expecting God to answer my prayer with some kind of audible words or some power that was going to be unmistakably His. But I never built an altar. I was still holding on to things. I was still doing things my way. Maybe you're in that same boat. You're sitting there wondering, God, I've been praying for my marriage to work, but it just isn't doing. You're not doing it. You're not changing them enough. Maybe it's not them. God, I've been praying that my job would have a better environment. Maybe it's not your job. I've been praying that my church would just do the things that I want my church to do. Maybe it's not your church. Maybe it's us. Let me just put it, because I've already bumped up to the line, gone over a little bit. Let me just go all the way. And you can yell at me in the congregational meeting later. Right? Some of you are expecting God to answer your prayers with words of power, but you haven't taken time to build an altar. So you're holding on to your baggage. It's guilt, it's shame, it's whatever it is. And I can almost hear God saying to me and saying to you and saying to us, what am I supposed to light on fire? You haven't put nothing there for me to light. You want to party, you want to praise, you want to do all these things, but you're not willing to pay the cost. You're not willing to build the altar. You're not willing to put it down onto it. You're going ahead and letting somebody else provide the land, provide the sacrifice, provide the fire. And because of that, you don't get to be blessed. You don't get to see me work, and no fire is needed. I wonder, friends, are we settling for good enough because pursuing excellence will cost us too much? Too much of my time, too much of my pride, too much of my likes, of my dislikes, too much of whatever it is. Maybe building an altar for us looks like this. Taking a step, laying a brick, paying a tithe, saying yes to something that God has called you to stopping the sin or the bad habit that you're invested in. Maybe your altar is letting go of your pride enough to recognize that today's the day you need to go home and set up an appointment with a therapist. Because there's baggage you've been carrying around for too long. Hey, and in case you think that that's too scary, that's the same conversation. Just to let you know, that's the same conversation that I've been having with myself for the last 2 years. You're not in this alone. But I think we all carry baggage around that comes from all kinds of different places, that if we're not willing to let go of it, we're never going to see God work. Maybe it's time to check into a treatment center or to break off an affair or to actually show up to church more than once a month. Which, by the way, if you show up to church once a month in the United States of America, that seems to be good enough. Because that's the average. Prepare something so God can do His thing. And then, only then, will God send fire. When we build an altar, when we put our junk on top of it and say, God, it's your turn. I could only imagine what would happen if every single one of us in this room went home, built an altar, threw our junk on it, and saw God come down with a fire and burn it all up and began doing amazing things. Began moving us to the place where, not where we thought we would be, but beyond that. I don't know if any of you noticed this, but God's promise to Abraham was a set piece of land. By the time King Solomon sat on his throne, that set piece of land was given to Israel, but so was all the neighboring territory. Why? Because God's a God who says, I will give in abundance if you will be faithful to me. Here's the amazing thing, is that as Israel was acquiring that land, as their neighbors were bringing them their riches, as their enemies were afraid of armies that were never really meant to be armies, they were never perfect, but they always pursued excellence. Church, I'm not saying that we have to be perfect. We don't have to have the perfect kids program. We just have to be seeking for excellence in it. We don't have to have the perfect praise team. We just have to be seeking excellence in it. Thank God you don't have to have the perfect preacher. But hopefully you'll have one that will pursue excellence. Because altars can alter you. And once we see God send fire on an altar, we'll build more. So let's not look for the whole thing. Let's not put the whole elephant up there. Let's just see if we can get an altar for a bite of an elephant. Look back at the text. It says David commanded to gather together the resident aliens who were in the land of Israel. Listen, resident aliens means those who were not a part of the nation of Israel. Those who had just happened to be there. Who wanted to get a taste of what God was doing. And he set stone cutters to prepare dressed stones for building the house of God. David also provided great quantities of iron for nails, for the doors of the gates, and for the clamps, as well as the bronze in quantities beyond weighing, and cedar timbers without number. For the Sidonians and the Tyrians brought great quantities of cedar to David. For David said, Solomon, my son, is young and inexperienced. You can probably put it in all kinds of other words there. The house that is to be built for the Lord must be exceedingly magnificent, of fame and glory throughout all the lands. I will therefore make preparation for it. So David provided materials in great quantity before his death. David provided for a temple that he would never see. For a son who he said is young and inexperienced. In my mind, as a son who can remember older generations saying that guy is young and inexperienced, but they didn't use those words. As a father who is becoming older and has dreams and visions for my son, but recognizes that he doesn't do things all the way that I want him to do them. I say young and inexperienced to you, but in my mind, I have other words for that. Maybe you do as well. They don't do it like I do it. They're not doing it the right way. But here's what David said. I'll make sure that he'll succeed. Because it's not about me. It's not about him. It's about God. And if I can let go of all of this other stuff that's about me and him and just focus on God, then I will give him every wood. I will go to my neighbors and beg for wood. I will go to nations who want to kill me and beg for bronze. I will gather up everything that I need. You need all the nails? Then I won't just go to Menards. I will buy Menards. I will do anything it takes to make sure that we will seek after God. That his temple, that his altar is not going to settle for good enough. What are you doing? I want to finish with just telling you about three masons who were working at chipping chunks of granite from large blocks. The first guy seemed unhappy at his job. He was chipping away and frequently looking at his watch. Yeah, you ever do that at work? You go, feels like 8 hours, but I just got here 10 minutes ago. And when the man asked what it was that he was doing, the first mason responded, I'm hammering this stupid rock, and I can't wait till 5, and I get to go home. A second mason, seemingly more interested in his work, was hammering diligent when asked what it was that he was doing. He answered, well, I'm molding this block of rock so that it can be used with others to construct a wall. It's not bad work, but I'll sure be glad when it's done. Ever feel like that at your job? It's all right. Done worse. I'll chip away till it's good enough, and then I'll go home. Third mason was hammering at his block feverishly, taking time to stand back and admire his work. He chipped off small pieces until he was satisfied that it was the best he could do. And when he was questioned about his work, he stopped, gazed skyward, and proudly proclaimed, I am building a cathedral. I'm building a cathedral. In your life, what are you building? Because what you're building will dictate how you build it and with what attitude you come at it with. If I'm building an outhouse, I might just be good enough. But if I'm building a cathedral, I'm going to pursue excellence. Friends, maybe today is the first day that you realize you've been pursuing life, and you've been just not hoping for excellence. You've just been hoping that it'd be good enough. I have a friend, but no joke. As I shared with him, we were talking about sermon series. This is about a month ago, and I said, "This is where I'm going. This is what I'm going to talk about." And he goes, "These are his words, and maybe you echo them sometimes." But he looked at me and goes, "I hate you, Conrad." Because I hate you. And so I looked at him, I kind of laughed. I said, well, why? And I knew he was joking. Right? And he says, because I just told my wife I'm going to write a book called Good Enough. I don't have to try any harder. This is just good enough. I'll be content getting good enough. Good enough family, good enough kids, good enough job, good enough house. And here you come, telling me you're going to preach a sermon on pursuing excellence. And it's hard for me just to get to good enough. And I looked at him and I said, you know what, I hate you too. I hate that I have to share messages that are more hard for me to accept than to give. Because I'm all about good enough. I've been at jobs where we did something and I said, it's good enough for my house. But I wonder, what God says every time I say it's good enough for somebody else. Maybe God's saying today's the day you start pursuing excellence. I'm not telling you have to pursue perfection, because we have a God who promises that wherever we fall short, He will bridge the gap. If I'm not perfect, but I pursue excellence, He will bridge that gap. If I'm not the perfect husband, but I pursue excellence, God somehow miraculously will He'll form my wife to still think that I'm the greatest that there ever could have ever chosen. She'll blind her. He'll blind her. It's amazing. Maybe your step today doesn't have to be perfect, but has to be somewhere. Maybe the next step today is into the waters of baptism, where you say, today is the day that I stop choosing good enough and I choose excellence. Because we have a God who is nothing short of excellent. He framed the world so that it spins at just the right motion, so that we don't blow up in a ball of fire or freeze into a chunk of ice. And if you choose to chase after Him,
You say yes to Jesus. You say yes to his grace. You say yes to being washed in the waters of baptism. I promise you, he will bridge the gap. What are you building? And are you just shooting for good enough?